Ruler School is brought to you by Happy Little Hug Factory and these amazing patrons. Extra special thank you to guest lecturer patrons Brody Harris and Lance Albertson. Thank you for your support. Enjoy the video. Hey there everybody, DMO73 here, welcoming you back after another long week of Force of Will to the Teacher's Lounge. I am joined as always by Ryan Miles.
Ahoo!
Brandan Bremont.
Ahoy!
Frank Closser.
Yo!
And today we are joined by one of our patrons, Josh Patton.
Hey.
Glad to have you, buddy. Thank you for your support. If you want a chance to be on the Teacher's Lounge as well as support the channel, you can go support our Patreon. There's a link down below in the description as well as at the end of the video. So we've got some pretty interesting topics to kind of talk about. Earlier this week was GP Rome, but actually we're not going to touch base on that because hopefully you went to go watch the video that Paul did earlier this week talking about that format. Rhea Cluster kind of gives us an interesting peek at what is coming once rotation happens, I think, a little bit. And also, before we get into our topics, we have to go back to crown the winner of the now apparently a competition poll of the week. The question for last week was talking about what card we are going to be glad is gone and what card we are going to miss once Lapis Cluster rotates. And Ryan is the victor from this past week.
Thank you. I know. I can hear the resounding applause from all of you. I appreciate it.
He wanted to send Captain Hook is forever his captain, and he wants to burn Sylvia, Blade of the King, in a fiery pit of death. So congratulations, Ryan. You get to wear the non-existing crown for a week.
I'm
Beautiful.
not sure if
So happy.
Missing a card that's banned in New Frontiers is really fair,
do I get a
though,
speech?
so...
Yeah, nope, that's it. You get a crown
Okay.
and we move on.
All right, cool.
So we touched on this last week. Ryan, you actually suggested this topic, and I thought it would be good for today as we go into this kind of fresh format. It's this idea of what makes a good format good. There's a lot of discussion and kind of terminology that gets thrown around of, oh, this is a bad format, it's a bland format, it's a one-deck format, but this idea of what makes a good format, and there's lots of pieces to it. So what I'm going to have you do is, Ryan, I'd like you to kind of introduce us your thoughts about it, and then we'll kind of go around the room and talk, give our thoughts about it too.
Yeah. So my thing is, like, usually in the competitive meta game, there's some like overarching like tier 1, right? There's a number of decks that exist in that capacity, and it's just a matter of like how many decks can be competitively viable and then like have it feel like a good format. Because even when we have like a widespread open meta, kind of like we're going into right now and like we've done in the past, especially like when Lumia finally ends up good, it's almost always in like a wide open format for some reason. But we've seen times in the past, right, where you have the one deck formats, and sometimes they're tier 1 formats and sometimes they're tier 0 formats. An example of this would be like a tier 0 format, a one-deck format would be like Bahamut or the most recent Scheherazade, where everyone knows that's the deck to beat, and like you still can't beat it. And then like almost like a one-deck tier 1 format would have been Alice's World, where like Necrolance was kind of a deck, but really the deck to be playing was Alice's World, but it wasn't like tier 0. Like you could still beat Alice's World with decks like Necrolance, with like some random stuff like Grimia topped like a GP during that format. And you had like some diversity of like people just like going full anti-meta to beat that deck, and it was beatable. And then like for 2-deck formats, you think about like Fox Prisia. Again, like you could say like the Necromancer, or like the Knights and Stealth format when the Black Moonbeam set dropped. And then like you've got triangle formats, which we've seen numerous times in Force of Will's history, and I won't go into like the numerous examples of that, but like for me, like the triangle formats are almost the worst, where it's like just there's no way to like sneak an anti-meta deck into that triangle, because even if you beat like 2 of them, you're almost always losing to the 3rd, and that's even if you can beat 2 of them. So I just want to kind of speak about what you guys think, like which of those options do you prefer, or do you think that the best format is just like there is no meta game, nobody knows what to build, you just go wide open into some nonsense and just, you know, see what sticks?
That is unfortunately a relic of the past. I don't think that sort of like wild west of formats can exist outside of like, so the only time like in my time period playing trading card games that I can think of that happening is literally when Star City had their SCG Con and just like wildly announced in front, hey, we're doing no ban list modern, which is not a real format. And so no one had literally any information on what would do well there. Like people had like conjecture, but it was completely the Wild West. That's because it's something that literally no one was playing. There was no information. There weren't even like big local events for it, so there was no data to come from. Trading card games to advance to a point where people like expect a certain amount of information trading, and that sort of creates a meta inherently.
Just to follow up on that for people that don't really know Magic culture, you also couldn't play No Ban List Modern on Magic Online, which was a huge part of most competitive testing. So like it was really extremely difficult to get good testing in for No Ban List Modern. So that really was just wild.
Yeah.
I think the only Force of Will equivalent that we've kind of had for that would be like the Worlds formats from 2015 and 2016. We didn't even get that in 2017, but like those were like new cluster, like block only formats with exactly one set. And in 2015, it became very apparent that like Blazer Knights was the only deck you could play. But in 2016, if you guys did get the chance to like play in that format at all, it was actually, in my opinion, like one of my favorite formats because we went to this tournament with the best players in the world, with absolutely like. I mean, you think about like net decking, like almost ruining like the idea of an anarchy format where you just go online and like you can see what other people are brewing and what other people are playing. But because it was the World Championship and everyone just had their own regions locked down and their own ideas locked down, like you really did come into this tournament like not knowing almost what to expect, and then like you just saw like the same deck kind of rise to the top in the end. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I can speak to the fact that in doing testing for that format, that Worlds format, right, there were like 6 or 7 different decks that we were testing even until like the day of. And even then, none of us could pick for sure who was going to be playing what, right? So it was
even
like...
to this day.
Yeah, like I played against, in that format, I played against Faria... Or, sorry, not Faria. I played against Feetsing, like 2 different variants, completely different variants of Feetsing. I played against Charlotte. I played against Mikage. I personally played Mercurius. I played against a Mars. I played against a Millium. Like, that format was literally the Wild West, and I had no idea what I was going to be sitting down against.
Even to this day, I don't know if that, like, hook deck was better as Charlotte or Feetsing.
Oh, it was Charlotte.
Now.
Yes, I think it was definitely Charlotte. Before we get into kind of our just kind of start off our thoughts about which of those we prefer. Josh, do you have any words about like which of those formats, like tier 0, 1 deck, tier 1 deck, 2 deck triangle formats? Like which ones do you think you've enjoyed the most, or you think are kind of the healthiest?
So me personally, since I'm more of a casual player with a competitive heart, I really like the Wild West theory. The Wild West theory that like anything is possible. I'm an any given Sunday kind of guy. Just showing up, nobody knowing any information, and just ready to go. So like when I played Magic, it was like I loved pre-release events. I still love pre-release events in Force of Will. That theory that anything can happen, and I like going into a match and not knowing all 40 cards in my opponent's deck, and having to play around some shocks and surprises. Like, so for me, that's healthy gameplay, and that's what gets me excited when I play. So that's kind of what I look forward in a format.
Yeah, I personally prefer triangles, but I also will argue that Force of Will has never really ever seen a pure triangle. Because most of the times that we do squeak into a triangle format, it's like rock beats paper, paper beats scissors, sorry, let me go backwards. Rock beats scissors, scissors beats paper, paper beats rock, paper also sometimes beats scissors. So like, to me, that's not, like, that's the closest I think I've ever come in my playing of Force of Will to a true triangle format, and that's not a true triangle, because there's not an actual, like, perfect flow. It's like, Alice's World, or what was it, Guiber, like the first one I think was Guiber Turbo with Feasting, right? It was like there was a deck that was designed to beat Guiber Turbo, right? And it had a pretty solid matchup, except the fact that Guiber Turbo could still just crush its face.
It was, I think, Mikage, like CFC format.
Yeah, I think so. So like Mikage was like the part of the triangle that was designed to be able to beat Feetsing, and it did its job in the fact that the other piece of the triangle could beat Mikage, right? And then Feetsing beat that deck. Yeah, Val 2, right? But the problem was that like there were just times that Mikage just still couldn't beat Feetsing, and so it's like, well, this isn't a pure triangle, and that's really frustrating. I think that if we ever actually got to a format where we had this like perfect triangle, then I would be like, yes, let's go. I'll play an event every single weekend. Let's just run it, because I think there's still a little bit of that Wild Westness in the fact that like people have to try to guess the meta a little bit of what's coming in. But if all the points of the triangle are equal, then it's like, okay, well then what am I gonna pick? It's not, like we're walking into Collinsville in a couple of weekends, right? And like I can tell you right now that probably 30 to 40% of the meta is going to be Keurig. Like okay, but it would be cool to walk into an event going, okay, these are the 3 decks, this is the triangle. I have no idea what percentage of each is probably going to get played in this. I have to try to make a guess, right?
What you just described there is already a triangle, though, right? Because if you already know that 30 to 40% of the deck is Keurig, and we already know that Keurig is a beatable deck, then you can assume that somewhere between 30 and 40% of people are going to be playing a deck that beats Keurig, and that some percentage of the people are going to be completely ignorant to that fact, and they're going to probably beat the people that are just gunning against Keurig. So that's already a triangle.
My problem is I'm concerned that Keurig might be the scissors that sometimes still beats rock. So
maybe so.
I don't know. I have hope for the potential of this coming format, and the stuff that I've been playing, like I've actually had some pretty good success against Keurig with some decks, and so I haven't really fleshed out the full triangle. Like, it's potential, right? But there's still some concerns that we're just gonna fall back into the same old, not really a triangle.
I would say the important part is, I guess for a healthy format is to just, and every player should walk into a big tournament and know that they have a bad matchup and be able to use their skills to overcome the bad matchup. Just walking into a tournament with the best deck, I think, is just the wrong way to go about a card game. So I like the idea of the triangles too.
I think like triangle formats are honestly like my least favorite format, just because when it's like a 1-deck format, there's that idea that you can build like a pure anti-meta deck because everyone's going to be on that 1 deck, and then you can kind of take it down. In a 2-deck format, like there's like 2 probably like usually very polarizing options. Like the most recent one was Fox Prisia, where it's just like complete different ends of the spectrum, and you really can't beat both of them in game 1, but like there were some options you could kind of mess with that would like completely hose one game 1, and then you would just like completely throw the other matchup game 2, and then you would try and like beat the other deck in your game 2 and game 3. And as we'll get into sideboards later, like you play more game 2s and game 3s than you do game 1, so like that's a viable option. But once you get to triangle formats, like you don't have enough like sideboard space, enough mainboard space, depending on how like different the triangles are, and they've all got their own like sideboards as well to be able to hedge against you. So I feel like that's the hardest format to like bring in an extra deck. So like in a 1-deck format, you can bring in a 2nd deck. In a 2-deck format, you can bring in a 3rd deck. But it's really hard to bring a 4th deck into a 3-deck format, just because like it's already getting pretty well covered just by those 3 decks, and it's kind of like a 2-deck you can turn into a triangle, but like a triangle just kind of like solves itself. Like anarchy formats like tend to boil down into like 3 popular decks before like the meta really gets solved, in my opinion. So like that's kind of where I stand. I just like bringing in the anti-meta if ever possible, and it's hardest to do in a triangle format.
That's fair. Brandon, Frank?
So I'm with Brian in that I think that triangles are kind of annoying, especially when the triangle is as rock, paper, scissors as you're describing, like where each one has like a 90% or better against the other. Honestly, the best kind of format would be a rock, paper, scissors, which has about a 60%, but each can still beat the other in like deep and interesting games. But that's just not really how Force of Will works, because this game, it's just a little bit too consistent. So typically if something has a good matchup, the good matchup exists in the like 70 to 90% range, which makes that kind of not very much fun. I like what Ryan's saying with like the 1 and 2 popular deck formats, and then you can kind of snipe either one out of the sideboard. I think that's the most fun. Anarchy can be fun, but I actually don't think we've ever truly had that in Force of Will. Like right now we're probably going into the format where we have the most amount of things that are kind of on the table for consideration. And even right now, I think that after 1 or 2 GPs, we're all going to agree that it's about maybe 3 decks truly viable. But right now, it looks like there could be like 6, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. I'm glad I'm not playing Collinsville. I'm glad I'm going to be commentating it, because I'm going to see some pretty crazy stuff.
So I've got a question for you guys, kind of to like wrap up this topic, I guess.
Well, hey, excuse me, we gotta have Frank's opinion first.
Too. Yeah, not
Frank.
like to wrap it up, but like
So,
kind of move it along.
Part
Sorry.
of what I hear you part of what I hear you guys saying is sort of you're discussing 2 different aspects of this. So I hear a lot of like, so for example, like you've got 6 and it'll maybe go down to 3, and there's that aspect of an unexplored format versus a format that like, and so like to some extent like that's where you get some of the Wild West, is like it's just when no one knows the answer yet. But then there are and then as opposed to formats that just like we've been through it a little. So like the Prisia Fox one, where like we had solved it to the point where we knew we had like two serious decks and then like some room in the middle, but they just weren't quite good enough once it was solved. And so there's that difference there that sort of players use interchangeably when they describe formats. And so I think if you actually reached a solved triangle, I would probably be fine in there, but I don't know. I don't really have a preference on any of these.
That's fair.
I hear the like solved versus Wild West in general. They're describing how new we are to it as opposed to how open the format is.
Yeah. Ryan? You had
Yeah,
a
so
different point?
like kind of like to just bring it all together, like as long as you've been playing Force of Will, you know, competitive or otherwise, like in the history of how long you've been playing, like what format do you think was your favorite to play in? Like, do you think it falls into any of these categories of one deck, two deck, triangle? And do you think like the meta was solved or was it unsolved?
So mine is definitely post LEL when we had like Gwyber, Val 2, Fox. There was like a Lumia deck.
Val 3.
You could play. Yeah, Val 3. And then like there was like a variety of other like mini control decks you could play. We had like Teth and Taxes. I think that deck meta was very good because there was like a bunch of 1.5 things you could play, but Gwyber was still the best, so you could like get a bunch of wins through that, but you also could just go and have fun if you wanted to.
Yeah, I would have
I thought
to
that
agree.
was a fun format.
I would have to agree. I think that format probably was one of my like most fun GPs. Was GP Collinsville the second time I went to Collinsville? So like Team Ogre played this like Val 3 list that sideboarded into Val 2, which was pretty fun. Like I really liked that format. I enjoyed it. I think the other format that I really enjoyed was Stealth Knights format. Because I think that, weirdly enough, the stealth mechanic, although it was inherently busted,
was it?
I think that stealth as a mechanic was like incorrectly created, but I think the package itself lended itself to so many different kind of like supporting cores, right? So it was fun to like know I was going up against stealth mirrors, but then like seeing the different rulers that people would try to use with stealth, or like, you know, these little techs that people would use for the mirrors or stuff like that. Like I enjoyed the like games of chess that came with playing these like weird stealth, like the mirrors that came in the Stealth Knights format.
Yeah, I would probably have to agree with most everyone else. I think the LEL for me was about the last time where it was all really fun. There was a lot of cool things happening. There was a lot of cool deck ideas, and it just felt really healthy for us, and I really enjoyed LEL.
Frank, you got anything to add on to that?
I've got a couple, and like I don't really have a good way of distinguishing them because they're just kind of based on like experiences more than the formats. Like you, I guess since you two have met me a couple times, but like I don't particularly like. I will bring whatever I feel like bringing, and so I will almost like, regardless of the format, I'll almost always play something I like. And so for me, it's just like formats where like something else like made the format particularly special. And so that LEL format, which was like Nats into Collinsville in January, was particularly fun for me because that was a time period where like it was one of the first times I had been on a big team testing, and so that was the first time I had a deck that like we'd been prepping on for a month ahead of time, and like we'd put in a bunch of reps, gone through versions of it, and so like that format stands out to me for that experience. I remember liking the New Frontiers right after the release of SKL. I think there were a bunch of fun decks to play then, and I recall that States being particularly fun. And I mean, not everyone liked it, but like I had a bunch of fun in the grindy mid-range like mirror format that was the Scheherazade Abzan format up in Minnesota.
Actually like the Scheherazade format for a hot second, you're saying?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I love grindy mid-range mirrors, and like
can speak to the games I played against him.
Green decks smashing into each other is the epitome of that type of game.
Interesting. So
okay,
for mine,
to be fair, I started playing Magic when like Siege Rhino Obzon was the deck, and so that kind of influenced what I view as the fun games to be.
You guys are speaking Japanese to me. I don't know Magic terms.
Siege Rhino is
sometime,
evil
I will
genie.
educate you on Dr.
Boy.
Rhino, PhD.
I love that. So I think it's interesting that we all chose the LEL format because that was like the first one that came into my mind too. And what's even like more interesting about this is like everyone thought that format was solved when we had nationals in that format, and it was top 16 was like 11 Fox, like 3 Dark Alice, and then like a Val 2 or something. And everyone's like, oh, why did they print Fox? Fox is the most broken card you've ever printed. Griffin's stupid. Like, what have you done? Turns out, those people were right, but like immediately after that, like no cards get printed. Like Japan just plays Lumia Hook, and then it's like, oh, Lumia Hook's pretty interesting. Like you can Captain Hook Fox out of the game on turn 3, and now that's a deck that Fox needs to worry about. And suddenly with like Fox worrying about that deck, like Feasting came back for no reason because Feasting was like being dumpstered by Fox, but now like Lumia Hook can like beat Fox, but Feasting beats Lumia, and then like Val 2 beats Feasting and can also beat Lumia, and there's just like this crazy like nonsense going on. But it started off as just like there's Fox, and like maybe if you want to beat Fox, there's Dark Alice, and that was it. So I think that was like the coolest part was everyone thought that format was solved. We had an event, it confirmed what everyone was worried about, and then with absolutely no cards being printed, with absolutely no ban list, suddenly it's one of the best formats in the history of Forcible. Like that's amazing to me.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to see if this coming format that we're walking into can potentially be that. Keurig scares me a little bit to push me off of that concept, but I have faith in the players, and I think that there's a lot of cool stuff that's capable, that we'll start to see those, kind of like Brandon was talking about, the triangle where it's not 70 to 90, but it's more like 60 to 70 percentages within that triangle, within that square or whatever, and I think that would be pretty cool. So really just worried about ground and air supremacy, but we can talk about that at a different time.
Also, I guess as far as the coming format, like it's definitely possible for like a classic red deck to like dominate a format, but classic red decks are something that everyone is very used to playing against, and they're like such a defined entity, like that when they're good, it's just the most efficient version of it, that it's, well, like they can be really good and be format defining. Like I expect Keurig to be like the pillar of the format that everyone's building around. Like a red deck format is generally something people can build to play around.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
I do agree with that. We definitely have a lot of tools right now to beat Keurig, but like the fact that Keurig exists and does have these hyper efficient tools is going to make it like, oh, I'm building a deck, like I have to make sure I don't just get hosed by Keurig in game 1, or else I'm going to like not do well in the tournament. But at the same time, like if you do build a good deck, you can just be like, I acknowledge Keurig exists, and I'm never going to lose to it because like I main deck 4 Miscalc, right. I side deck 4 Naughty Child's Chastising, and I'm just like that doesn't exist to me. It's not a deck.
And that exact concept is why I'm very happy about this format. Is like Keurig is the pillar, but like if Keurig is the scissors, then we have some very good rocks. Like we're not like the Fox Priscia format where like those two decks were both basically unbeatable unless your entire 40 was built to snipe those, and even then you didn't have 100%. Keurig, if you're building to snipe it, you'll beat Keurig. Like you're fine, and so it's not going to be that big of a disaster.
Yeah, I'm excited.
That was, by the way, for the record, I mean, like, obviously Locals has a certain amount of variance just because it's people playing for fun, but like that was my first experience in the format. Was I took something that was like, just like my Keurig matchup was rough, but like the end of the day I was like, man, I was able to do a ton of other stuff. I could make like about 5 card swaps here and just have 20% better match against Keurig.
Yeah, which is great. And then hopefully we get the ruling that the rest of the world, or at least the Asian countries, have been using against Keurig and move on. So to move on to kind of our second topic, because I feel like we're all pretty much in agreement about what the best format is and kind of what Well, go ahead, Frank.
Sorry. As sort of a tangent to the format discussion, did we want to discuss which of these formats are like... So, like, separate from what we personally enjoy, did we want to discuss, like, which of these... Like, because I think that what is the best format is, like, not just a personal thing, but it also, like, which ones are best, like, are healthier, sort of depends on which group you're trying to be healthy for.
Oh, competitive versus casual?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, sure. So let's go around. We won't spend a ton of time talking about this, maybe just a quick second.
Yeah.
If you have to... So we have these kind of different options, right? So there's Tier 0. So Tier 0, 1 deck. Tier 1, 1 deck. 2 deck, or Triangle, or Wild West. So kind of pick which one of those you might think is best for the competitive scene and which one you think is for the casual scene. So like I'll go first, right? So I think that for the casual scene that Wild Wild West and Anarchy is super fun because it encourages people to just kind of try really off the wall stuff and bring it and have a good time, and they don't get just hosed and curb stomped. And then competitive, I've already talked about it before. I think that triangles are the best for that kind of environment.
See, I think you've diagnosed the competitive scene incorrectly,
which is quite possible. So I wear silly gloves
of the,
and do
really
things.
competitive grinders I've met, and all the ones I've seen who consistently perform best the narrower the format gets. So a defined one deck format is very good for them because they will either play the best the one deck and simply tool themselves to win the mirrors as much as possible and put their skills and tuning ability to the test. Or if they're the really competitive deck builder, they have a defined enemy they can really build against. And so for example, one that absolutely most people hated it, but you could consistently see the best players in a format doing well was the Temur Energy format in Magic. There were a core set of the players who do well in Standard all the time who just stomped their way through that format because that's the format that is best for their skill set. The more decks you add, the more you add pairing luck into what they're doing. The more you stress individual card choices, and it's harder to be tuned because oh, you've made one call, but there's more unknown factors to push to stress that.
Right. That's fair.
So I can speak to that competitive grinder that Frank is talking about. So I had an unpaid invite before Mexico, and I spent the money on a plane ticket to fly down to Mexico because I knew that Scheherazade was the best deck. I knew that nothing could beat Scheherazade, and I knew that I would beat basically every Scheherazade mirror I came across. So I was able to make that decision with a extremely high confidence that I was going to get my paid in Mexico because it was a one deck format. And so kind of to what Frank is saying, from a very competitive grindy standpoint, I love the Scheherazade one deck formats, the Reflect one deck formats, the extremely skill intensive one deck formats. And so
sure,
but the Wild West Anarchy is probably best for the casuals.
I think the overall healthiest format is probably just for basically for having the compromise that makes the most people happy. The 2-deck format is generally the best.
Okay.
Most of the times when I've seen it doing well, so for example, you'll hear people describing the 2 best decks, one of which you'll have them arguing back and forth about which one beats the other. And then you'll have lots of people who are building really good, you'll have the people who want to be a little off the wall who are building to, be on the side and, sneak up on one of the two while having a passable match against the other. And, trying to be the triangle when there isn't really a defined third.
Right. Okay.
I would say I think for casual formats, I would probably say the triangle, or for casual players, I feel like triangle formats are a bit more fun than even the Wild Wild West formats. And I feel like in the Wild Wild West formats, casual players have a lot to look at. They can see the 4 or 5 best performing decks and then pick something that is really interesting to them. And then that deck choice that they chose is actually a competitive deck, and they felt like they get to choose it because there are so many options available. But in a triangle format, there are the 3 good decks, but then almost any deck that you pick outside of that triangle is gonna have at least probably 1 to 2 good matchups out of that, defined meta, and then you're gonna get absolutely creamed by the third if logic holds. So I think that if I was playing as a casual player, a triangle format would be the most interesting because then I could play almost any deck I wanted and then still have a good matchup at a local tournament against one of the perceived good decks, and I feel like that would be really exciting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess my my locals, we're not competitive. So when for every set that's come out at this point, all my people, they get most excited to play whatever ruler they think is the coolest. And it's cool to see Force of Will played, at that level instead of the okay, I gotta play best deck, I gotta win prize packs, I gotta win, right? No, our people are just alright, Panda is amazing. I love Panda. I love Gems. I want to play Gems, right? The one girl before release, she loved Imul, just loved the art on it. And before anything was broken, she bought a box, got the ruler, and just threw a bunch of inverse cards in there and had a blast with it, just flipping all day. And you know, that's where I see people have the most fun at locals, is win or lose, they're playing a deck that has a mechanic that they can enjoy, you know, and that they can have fun with. They can do silly things, you know, not always win all the time or really know what's in the other person's deck, but just having fun with the game, you know.
For sure. For sure.
I
think
remember
that
when I had fun playing Force of Will.
I have fun playing Force of Will every
Way
week.
back in the day.
Strokes the beard, like reminiscing.
Oh, man. Well, before we get too down that rabbit hole of thinking about fun playing this game, let's talk about some things where I got chastised last week. Frank.
Naughty child.
So yeah. I'm attacking you directly, destroy target Jeremy, and gain life equal to the number of subscribers I currently have. So there you go. You're set. You're at like 10,000 life. It's fine. So, Frank, you were talking last week about this kind of difference between myself and you in regards to sideboarding and walking to locals. So I wanted to give you the floor a little bit to kind of talk about this concept of sideboarding at both the like local level and like the competitive level. And then Ryan, you had some pretty solid thoughts about that too that I'd like you to kind of toss in, and then the rest of us can kind of share our thoughts about it as well.
Just to start with, this is more on my soapbox on this is more on like people's positions on sideboards as opposed to like sideboarding itself. Because the topic of how do you build a good sideboard, what do you do with a sideboard, is as deep as just deck building in general. It's not something we can do in a single podcast. But an opinion I run into a lot, or an experience I run into a lot, is you go up to locals, you're like, all right, you pull out your deck, you play a game one, you have a ton of fun, and you've seen you've played a good 8 turns, you've seen a bunch of their stuff, and then you go to your sideboard and you start making swaps, and you see that they literally don't have a sideboard, and they look at you slightly weird, and they're like it's odd that you even have this defined sideboard, and they're like, if you sideboard too fast, they start to get scared because they're like, oh god, what's he doing? And so I run into a lot of people who sort of treat this sideboard as either it's this extra thing you use if you're being particularly spikish, or it's just sort of last step to the deck, but the least important step. I've seen, like, even from competitive players, I've seen a ton of people who are like, what do you think of this deck? And they'll send me a full deck of, like, alright, here's all 40 or 41 of my main deck cards, here's my stone deck, and there's, like, literally no sideboard cards. And it's like, hold up, you're claiming you've tested this, but there's not a single card in your sideboard. And first, the math problem with that is simply that you are playing a best of 3. At the absolute best, if you are unstoppable, you never lose a single game, you will spend half of your card game life sideboarded. If you're at all normal, you're going to have some number of 3s and some number of 2s. And so you'll spend somewhere in the neighborhood of 66 to 60% of your day sideboarded. That is more than the amount of time you spend with your main deck configuration. And there are literal decks that exist because their sideboard is so good. I'm trying to think of the last, like, Ryan might have to help me here. I'm trying to think of, like, some of the Force of Will examples we've had of decks that were just made because they're, like, a decent main deck and an extraordinary sideboard.
I would almost say, like, the very last format where we had that green-black Scheherazade that was just like, sometimes I need to beat Ayu a little bit harder, and sometimes I need to beat Kyrix, so I'll take my free draw card stones and turn them into white stones. And the fact that it had, like, one of the best Scheherazade mirrors made it, like, the best deck in the format, and then it also just could not lose to those, like, rogue kind of, like, spiky matchups out of just because its sideboard just made it free.
Yeah. I guess another good example of, or another similar example where part of what made a tier 0 deck so unbeatable was this setting was back when Reflect and Refrain was around. You'd hear some of the competitive players talk about, like, 1 or 2 cards they had in their main deck that they would almost call pre-sideboarded, because the ability there to, like, draw a card and tuck something that was dead in your hand was so powerful. They would start to bleed sideboard cards into their main deck, opening them up to more, like, heavy bullets in the side. And so, like, game 1, they would already have, like, the same way Scheherazade does. It'd be like, oh, game 1, I already have access to Last Days of the Powerless Dragonoid. And because they have so many of these regular sideboard cards game 1, Game 2, I'm reaching for the deep stuff to just crush your chances of victory. And, like, those were inherently, like, unhealthy formats, but there have been healthy formats where there have been decks that were defined by their sideboard.
Yeah, I mean, I think of, in terms of the idea, I have to say, in, like, the Stealth Knights era, right? So, like, maybe even I'm thinking Stealth before necessarily Knights got discovered. So Billy Button be praised for, I guess, solving that problem. But, like, you know, there were certain Stealth decks that, again, kind of by switching out their main deck ruler to kind of support the Stealth package, they were able to tweak their sideboards to shore up the different potential mirrors or different potential stealth bad matchups very easily. So, like, I think of the fact that I played 0 stealth, right? And so 0 stealth was, like, in game 1 was a solid mirror breaker because we got access to Zero's Magic Light to be able to quickly deal with their flips. We got access to a heavier white base than typical stealth decks were playing and things of that nature. So, like, I think of, but the main thing was, it's like, okay, so now I know I'm playing against Stealth, or now I know I'm playing against Knights, so it's like, okay, well, I can go into my sideboard and, like, really get access to all of this cheap removal and making sure that I'm, like, stealing their swiftness or, like, other things like that. I don't know. So I think that the Stealth Mirror era probably had a lot of, like, really defining sideboard choices, too.
There are also cards that, like, live and die by, like, how seriously you take your sideboard. So, like, last week I mentioned, like, my love for Kagi's Moonbeam Butterfly. That is partially because there are probably a half dozen to a dozen cards I don't know that I would ever have sleeved up. Like, a favorite of mine is Grim the Rightful King. It's a very targeted thing, and I have put that card into play a lot of times, but this coming format is about the only time I would ever contemplate mainboarding that card. Or, like, and because of that, I would honestly probably not have played that card and might not even have considered that card was there going into this format, like, while I'm testing around. And so, like, there's just, like, cards that exist like that are almost, like, if you're not taking your sideboard seriously, they're just going to seem awful or too narrow, and then when like, you don't get to use them, and then when they do become suddenly relevant, they're going to blindside you.
Yeah. Josh, Brandon, you guys have any thoughts? Sorry to cut you off there, Ryan.
No, you're good. I do want to contest one of Frank's points, if you want me to do it now or after someone else talks, either one.
Go ahead and do it now. Let's go ahead and do it now.
Fresh in our mind. One of the things that Frank has brought up is that you are going to play at least 50% of your game ones without a sideboard, and then, like, or with at least 50% of your games are going to be sideboarded, and more likely than not, you are going to play, like, a game 3, which means that more of your games will be post sideboard. And one of the arguments I have to that is, like, in super, super dense control formats where you are playing 50-minute game ones, like, your main board needs to be locked in. And one of the things that I've seen people do is they get really heavy into their sideboard. They're like, oh, I can just throw this matchup because I'll beat it post board. And it's like Fox Mirrors. And it's like, all right, well, sometimes Fox Mirrors just, like, have a super grindy game one. So, like, you really do want to, like, main deck some of those cards and, like throw the Prisia matchup, just because, like, you'll lose to Prisia in 5 minutes and then you can win games 2 and 3 once you bring those cards in. Like, you're not going to beat anti-Fox control in, 20 minutes and then have time for a game 2 and 3. Like, if you lose game 1, you need to have time to win post board in 2 games, and sometimes that's a problem I see people struggle with.
Fair.
Yeah, I would say, for me, every time I build a sideboard, he brought up Grim the Rightful King, and that's kind of, the addition hate. There's always, those times when I'm building the deck and I'm like, all right, if I ever see this card, I just straight up lose, right? And so, for me, I always have to have, like, a little bit of love for that in my sideboard, and it usually ends up being addition hate because I can't mainboard addition hate right now, but we might have to. But yeah, I think the rest of my sideboard I usually use for, like, numbers tweaking. Like, I'll probably not so much run unique cards in my sideboard, but stuff to alter my numbers so that I can see them more in different matchups. If I'm going against a Resonator heavy deck or stuff along those lines, I can just kind of adjust on the fly. And that's kind of... Out of
curiosity, to give context to that comment, do you generally find yourself playing more mid-range control or aggressive decks?
So for me, I mid-range, definitely more mid-range.
Yeah.
personally, like when I was in Magic, I played aggressive all the time, and I started aggressive in Force of Will, but I have a lot more fun with mid range.
Okay, I was just curious to give context to like the numbers tweaking. It's not something I would personally see aggressive decks doing a lot.
Brandon, any thoughts?
Well, Frank really covered a lot of the you're going to play more than 50% of your game sideboard, so it's really important to build with that. We're not going to go like too in depth here on like how to think about sideboards, but I think that to elaborate on one of the points that Ryan made about how you can't just throw a game one against the most popular deck, in the Scheherazade deck I submitted for Mexico and California was the same list. We sided 0 cards in the Scheherazade mirror. I had no card. I did not sideboard a single card against Scheherazade, and Scheherazade was the most popular deck in format. And the reason for that was because we had a philosophy going into it that if there was a card you would sideboard against Scheherazade, it should be in your main deck, because that was like the deck you were going to play against most often. It was the only thing you could really lose to. And so I always thought that was funny when I played against anyone in a Scheherazade mirror, and we'd go to game 2 and they'd put like 8 cards in their deck, and I would think like, why wasn't this just your original deck configuration? Because this is the only thing you should have been scared of in the first place.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I think for me, given the channel, right, I try to not bring sideboards to locals. If I'm playing at any kind of competitive event, you best believe I'm thinking sideboardy stuff. But a lot of the focus on the channel is to show off like the core concept of a new ruler or the core concept of a deck, and then say, okay, audience, like I've shown you kind of what it can do, now you can take it and build it and kind of tweak it. So there's that. I also have a personal policy, and I think this speaks to the fact that I don't like spiking people at a local level, let's say that. Is that if I have a sideboard and my opponent that I'm playing against at locals doesn't have a sideboard, then I personally choose not to sideboard. Like, it's just like, okay, I'm not gonna be a jerk, and like, I don't necessarily say that everybody who's doing this is a jerk, but like, I see it myself as like, okay, my opponent doesn't have a sideboard, you know, they lost game 1, I want them to still have a good time. I'm not gonna go make my deck even better against their deck and say, okay, let's play a second game. But that's just
if you lost game 1 though.
If I lost game 1, then I'm more inclined to sideboard a couple cards.
You could sideboard to make the deck worse.
The amount of that's true. But the amount of times, hashtag humble brag, I guess. The amount of times that I lose game 1s at locals is not very high. I think in the past like 3 months I've maybe lost 1 game 1.
So, but part of the problem there, Jeremy, you are like. When you post videos, when you go to locals, you are a figure people pay attention to. And so when you set the precedent that, oh, I don't have sideboards, or like you have one with you but then you just never use it, you sort of send the message to everyone else that either it's unimportant or it's not something we should be doing here.
That's fair.
Which does some of them a disservice, because like, especially when you reach like the level of locals, the field gets very broad if people are bringing what they want. And so, for example, there are some, like, you know, IU, for example, has been out of the format for a little bit, but locals will still play it. And there are some decks that just, like, Game 1 configuration cannot beat an IU deck. It consistently punches them in the face faster than they can do anything, and they don't have a clean answer. If they're under the mindset that they just don't have a sideboard, they now go to locals knowing that there's a player that if they ever get matched with, they can just sign the match slip already because they're not playing that game. And that's unfair
fair.
and unfun for them.
That is a fair point. I guess we'll leave it up to the audience. Comment, for those of you who are listening, comment down below if you think I should change my approach to sideboarding, if I should just start hard spiking players and sideboard every game.
Well, there's a difference between like
I know, I'm just teasing you.
Sideboarding.
Yeah, I'm just teasing.
It will also, unfortunately, like Force of Will does this a little bit, and Magic will definitely do this. If you never sideboard, you're going to bias yourself against certain colors.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like, because it's part of some of like the easiest example is simply white. If you ask most people what white's color identity is, it's just, and they'll give you like, maybe list one thing like, oh, it has some like going wide stuff. But like, in all honesty, in both Force of Will and Magic, its strongest like color identity is simply that it gives you so many tools, and it's one of the most powerful sideboarding colors.
That's fair. Ryan, you have any kind of closing thoughts on this topic?
Not really. I guess, like, just on the topic of IU, it kind of reminds me of, like, the Val 2 days, where, like, sometimes there are decks that really, like, are fringe meta, but honestly just shouldn't exist at all, because there are, like, just so many hosers that exist. Like, in Val's 2 case, there was Barrier of Shadows, there was Death Sight, there was Black Moonbeam, but, like, people just didn't respect the deck enough to, like, side these cards in appropriate numbers, or they were, like, worried about other matchups so much that they're like, oh, I can just side, like, my one Barrier of Shadows and my, like, one Black Moonbeam, and that'll be fine. And it's like, no, if you don't see those cards by turn 3, you're just gonna die. And the same is true in, like, the IU matchup, where, like, even, like, there's no, like, actual hoser for IU. Like, you need, like, consistent multiple turns of having Lorite, of having Scarlet's Agony, of having Melfi, like, things like that. So, like, I tend to aggressively overboard for those kind of decks because I hate losing to them, because when I do lose, it just feels like I didn't, like, sideboard enough for them, and that's the only, like, clause that comes into my mind when it comes to beating those types of decks. So I like to err on the side of, like, sideboarding too much, even if I never see them, just because I never want to lose to them, because I believe they should be free matchups for every deck.
That's fair. Definitely fair. So I hate to kind of push us onto our kind of last talk, because I feel like we could talk about this for a very long time and it'd be very good. But I feel like our silly, kind of fun closing topic for today could take a little bit longer than I think have in the past, and I want to make sure we have some time to talk about it. So there's been... It's happened once in the history of Force of Will, and it only really impacted, in the sake of the competitive scene, 1 or 2 events, and really only one ruler, and that is this idea of the Ascension, right? The Ascension of an old ruler. We had the One Ascension campaign, which gave us the new Welser, which gave us the new Priscia, which gave us the new Alice. Correct me if I'm wrong, but new Alice still never did anything in terms of fairies. Priscia definitely didn't do anything in terms of new Sacred Beasts, but Welser actually got a top with the new Welser.
Allosaurus.
Yeah. What did I say? Welser? Allosaurus, the other fire guy.
You got a 2-drop Goddard on your mind.
Yeah, I do. So that Allosaurus Ascension, topped Collinsville after it was released. But this idea of there are a lot of Grim Cluster and a lot of Alice Cluster rulers that I think would be cool to see ascended. And so with that idea is kind of each to pick one ruler from those clusters to ascend. And if you were to ascend them, not necessarily what you would want their effects to be, but like what direction you would kind of want them to be taken. So anybody can really jump in first if they have kind of an idea. Otherwise, I will go ahead with mine.
I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna start this one, and I'm gonna go in a weird direction here. I'm gonna call it a descension.
Okay.
And
Following.
I'm going to call out the Beast Maiden, reincarnated.
Oh, Priscia.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So here's the concept, right? So she's banned, gone forever, bye-bye. But she's beautiful and wonderful and best friend.
I'm following, yeah, I'm agreeing.
In order to make her playable again, we must kill her and reincarnate her into something that isn't broken and playable.
So what would that look like?
It would be... So I'm also big into the economics of Force of Will, right? And so what I would love to see happen, and this might be a little evil, but everybody's bashing on the variants, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if the variants were the cost to ascend or
to ascend? Okay.
Oh.
So we have to hunt down the variants. Oh, jeez.
Okay. I know, right? Oh, Jesus, right.
Rip everyone's wallets.
I don't even know what variant. Like, I know there's like the doll variant, and there was
rip everyone's
the dinosaur
wallets.
variant, and I can't name another variant card, and I probably have them sitting in like my piles upon piles of boxes, and I would tear my hair out trying to dig their final.
There's a really cute variant whale where like the original's blue, but the variant is pink, and it's really cute.
Yeah.
That's the best variant.
So how would you?
That.
So before we get, that would be interesting to see what happens, but. Josh, how would you? What direction? Kind of what would need to be changed about Priscia in this reincarnation? Reincarnated as a lower being. What would have to change on that card? Do you think? Like, what direction would that go?
Literally everything. I mean,
yeah. All right. So Judgment Judgment's got to be at least 3, and the Resonance
Good start.
needs to be. It just can't be a Resonance. It's got to be a cost.
Just pull resonance off the front.
Yeah,
Make
or
it
like a
pay
1
red, pay
cost.
green.
Yeah, it's like pay a red, target gets swiftness, pay a green, target gets flying. Some shenanigans like that, not call a stone and let's fly and run at the same time. Like that's
Sure.
But then honestly, flip side for a 3-drop, I don't know. It could
I'd double her God's Art cost.
That's what I like to hear.
Okay, yeah.
I would make it double red, double green.
Yeah. So yeah, basically just kill her, reincarnate, and then we can all have fun with what should have been.
Yeah, I think that'd be a cool idea. It'd be cool to see her come back.
Call it the Descension program.
The Descension program. I like it.
I think
Anybody else have one that they want to, or
I want to guess. I haven't pegged Bremont yet, but I'm gonna guess that Frank's gonna pick Glorious. And I'm still working on mine, so.
I have a guess. I have a guess as
Wait,
what Frank is going to
Glorious
pick.
is in
No.
the-
Frank
the
is going
Ascension
to.
program ends at Alice.
Frank is going to pick.
Oh, I thought we were. I thought we were ascending
if you're going to do a
Lapis.
current one, I think you have to descend, just like Josh would. But we're talking specifically Grim and Alice Cluster. Josh is very good.
Mine was Ellie. Mine was Lapis cluster. I thought we were like
Oh,
taking
no.
it to the next cluster.
Let's try and focus on Alice and Grim. So get your
gee, I
ruler
don't
binders out,
know.
folks.
Oh wait, why did we choose Alice and Grim?
Because Alice Cluster, that was the Ascension campaign.
That was the
The
first
whole
one.
Well,
purpose
yeah,
of the
but-
Ascension
yeah, but that was,
campaign
like, the
was to add
first Ascen-
Energize and some of the modern stuff to some of the first 2 when the game was younger. Like
Right.
that was the biggest change on all of them. Was simply the 3 ascended rulers had
Energize.
The originals did not, and there were
Right.
small like tweaks on top of it. Like some of them got bodies a little bigger, some of their effects got a little stronger. But the biggest, most notable change was simply they got Energize.
Right. So like making some small
Oh,
tweaks.
Okay.
This
From
is
an
really
Alice and
easy.
Grim.
If Ryan doesn't know mine, then he doesn't really
so
know me.
I
at
think
all.
I think I'm gonna peg Frank. I think Frank is gonna pick Kaguya, the Immortal Princess, Kaguya 2, but I could be wrong. But I'm gonna speak about what mine is.
What do you mean 3?
I am going to guess
No,
Bremont's
no.
before he goes. Just
Oh,
want to get that out there
okay,
now
yeah,
since
no,
I
okay,
missed
you're
the
talking
past
about
2
the-
weeks.
Kaguya 2, the Treasury Princess.
Okay.
That's my guess for yours anyway. But my personal, I would pick the Primogenitor. I would pick Gil Lapis, Dark Gil Lapis. Specifically, that his tweak would have to be a different kind of tax, right? So I would love his tax to be something like your opponent pays 1 more to play cards with Quick Cast, or something like that. I mean, that's, again, I don't know
That would
exactly what
be-
it would be, but like a tax in some way that it's possible to play around it. It's possible that it doesn't impact every single deck. And then on his flip side, I think I would keep his God Art exactly the same, but obviously replace Moon with something different. There's really not much on his backside that I would change. You would just have to, like, maybe change part of his God's Art because Regalia aren't a thing anymore, to where maybe he gets to grab, like, a creature of certain cost from the deck, a creature of some certain cost from their graveyard, and then in addition from their deck. You know, you'd have to kind of tweak it a little bit. But
Doesn't he
overall,
already get enough stronger just from switching to Edition? Because he found Edition.
Doesn't he already
feels
get a lot
before.
stronger?
oh yeah,
taking
just searching
off the
for
Moon.
addition. So maybe that's enough.
So, like, he's
but,
not
like,
judging for
I
Moon
I think
anymore,
it would
right?
be cool to see this kind of like static tax ruler kind of come back and get ascended and have energized and be able to play a little bit better. Have his tax kind of adjusted to fit the current setting. So that would be what I would ascend. I would ascend Gil Lapis, the Primogenitor.
So is the idea that these ascended rulers are able to play in New Frontiers?
Yeah, it would be the sense of they would the old ascended
No.
rulers stayed in their current cluster or whatever, but like
These would become part of Wanderer.
these would be potentially part of Wanderer format. Yeah.
Got it.
Dope. Gotcha.
The rules for this keep changing.
Yeah, they
keep
do. I
shaking my
apologize.
referee.
We should have better explained what the Ascension campaign actually was.
No, I
Yeah.
gotcha.
So for those of you who don't,
That's
so let me
going
say
to
this.
start
For those of
happening.
you who maybe are a little bit confused, the Ascension campaign was this idea of you sent in a bunch of cards, you got a ruler, it was a new name, new artwork, but it had an effect that gave it the same name as the old ruler. It provided energize and kind of tweaked the effects or stat lines or something of that ruler a little bit. But it still kept that ruler in the same cluster. So these rulers that we would be ascending would be still part of Atlas or Grim clusters. They'd be part of Wanderer.
They would
So we-
actually have a set number like within their original sets. They'd be like if it was a 300 card set, they were like card 301.
Right. So we have Frank, we have Brandon, and we have Ryan left to go. Anybody ready?
All right, Ryan.
I want
you
to guess
tell everyone?
Bremont's. Yeah, is it Dark
Yeah,
Alice?
tell everyone. It is, of course.
Yes!
So Dark Alice is like one of my favorite rulers of all time. So I once had a dream. Like young Brandon had
Keep
a
this
dream
PG, my friend. Keep it PG.
where I could play a deck that had no win con except Horn, and then I played Dark Alice, and I exiled your graveyard, and the only reason I won is because I had a Horn, and your Horn did nothing because I exiled your whole graveyard. And that was my win con. And when I first got into Force of Will, that was like the deck I wanted to play. And we don't have a Horn anymore, but we have like a few kind of Horn effects, and so if Dark Alice ever was like standard and ascended, I'd try to make that work again. It's like the dream.
So how would
Yeah,
how would you modify Dark Alice to kind of ascend her? Would you make any tweaks to her personally?
So, well, we'd have to, so I actually just think the ruler's very good on her own. Having Energize is pretty good. Flipping for 0, obviously, it doesn't get much better than that. You still have to exile 3 cards because that's just a part of it.
Do you keep paying for it, or do you make it free?
Well, you don't make it free. That's too
Well,
much.
you can't, yeah, the exile graveyard for free.
What if
thing
you
doesn't
made
make any
the
sense.
What if you made the
Do you even
first
need to do
exile?
that?
What if you made the first exile every turn free?
Yeah,
Just
like
the first one. Just the
Steel
first one.
Lapis kinda remove card from grave. First one.
I mean, you could make it cost 1 instead of black. Might make
just
it
like
a
Void.
little bit better. Yeah. The backside. I wonder, could I also ascend Schrodinger? Is that like a choice? Can I like also reprint Schrodinger like a little bit better?
I think you'd have to keep old Schrodinger.
I think we
come
have
on.
a Schrodinger, right?
Wait.
It's a 1/6. It's a black-white card. You already
Yeah, I got
Schrodinger.
ascended.
Just
Yeah,
get
What?
that.
Oh,
It
okay.
ascended.
Oh,
It
yeah.
ascended into a resonator.
What if when you get the Schrodinger, you get any card with Schrodinger in its name instead of
that would be
of the
that would be
ring
cool.
card?
I'm
That'd be
liking
cool.
that, yeah.
That's a cool idea. So we got Dark
And
Alice.
you can cast any card in your deck with Schrodinger in its name with X equals anything.
No.
Damn.
Not a little bit too strong there. So we still got Frank and we still got Ryan who's left.
I can go next.
Yeah.
For it.
Jeremy, your guess was interesting, but it's close because I did pick a blue slap you in the face giant J ruler, but you picked the wrong one. My personal choice is Valentina, Overlord of the Seven Lands.
No.
See, we should have guessed Frank's too. How did we not guess?
Val 2. Val 2.
I think that it's fun. My one problem is that like I don't have a good grasp of how fast someone would be able to judgment in Wanderer, because I would like to lower her judgment cost, but I think that her actual position should be to be the like one step slower J ruler deck that's just more consistent and bigger. Like that's what she was. Like when she was around, there were decks that just flipped faster than her, but she was just bigger than all of them, and like was more impactful when she flipped. It's like part of me wants her judgment to just be blue or blue and 1. The other tweak I'd like is I would like her backside to have enough toughness to live through Flames of the Outer World before the trigger resolves.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So like a 7/9, I think.
Oh yeah, that'd be interesting.
Is she still ruling the Seven Kings, or does she like come into the
No,
new world?
they get
and
new names.
Start ruling Panda and Kirik and Shayla.
Oh
Those don't
god.
have- It would
They
be
don't have God's
interesting,
Arts.
but I'm trying to think if there's any rulers with like God's Art. Like the only rulers whose God's Art I can think of that would be like you'd
Ayu.
really want to just like staple to her would just be Glorious's backside. Just one time, nope.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah, but that nope
she
doesn't
could
even hit
pick
Black
any.
Moonbeam, which
that
is
she
like
could
your
pick
biggest
up to
problem.
7 rulers from her sideboard and keep their names in God's Arts.
Oh, that
Ugh.
is way deeper than I was thinking.
Yeah,
Like,
that'd be interesting.
That actually, I guess going long, if you left her more expensive, that could be very good. Just like she's this expensible, flexible J ruler.
Yeah, where you have to like
that was,
pick. You know, you
that
can
was
pick up
more
to 7.
risk than I was willing to take. I love the idea.
Hey, we're
More
tweaking
risk.
each other's concepts here. It's great.
I love it.
By the way, this is the one I would pick for me. I think the best pick for the community is either. Oh wait, hold. Let me let Ryan go first.
Yeah,
before I say
Ryan,
this,
let's
so I
go-
don't
let's-
steal
yeah.
his thunder.
Can I guess Ryan's?
What are we guessing mine, or am I guessing Frank's?
Let's
other
see
one?
if I.
I want to guess Ryan's.
Ooh, I don't know
Okay,
if
are
you
you
guys
gonna
will actually
ass-
get this.
What do you think?
Are you going to
Brandon?
ascend reflect?
What is it?
Are you going to ascend reflect?
No, I'm not that ambitious.
Dang.
What are you going to ascend, Ryan?
I want to ascend Blazer Gil Rabis.
Oh yeah,
This card
clown.
Nice.
would be so cool right now. Like this card was just like one of the coolest rulers to just like bring out a board. it was like a cool ruler just to main deck, especially when it first came out and you were playing like Blazer Cthulhu, Blazer Knights, all kind of stuff like that. It's just got a really interesting like front side ability and a very like powerful anti-meta J side ability, and like even when you weren't like specifically countering a deck, like it was still good on its front side because of that mana fixing ability.
So how would you ascend it?
So I want to remove the red from this card because I don't think that red is like ever going to be good for the next year, because they printed a really cool card called Last Days of the Powerless Dragonoid, and I think it would be kind of neat if like he only like changed one color to another. So I would want his front side to be changing black mana into white mana, or vice versa. I think like thematically that's kind of cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Is it still a clown?
Of course, absolutely. Oh my god, that's not even. I can't believe you're asking me this question. How
so
absolutely.
What if you could?
About it, that fits thematically too, because the new Blazer is he's
black
gone
and
down the good path, and he's hanging out with his sister.
Yeah.
So what if you could?
Go ahead.
What if you could, at the beginning of the game? I'm just gonna like make extra ascensions to just make things stupid broken. What if you could, at the beginning of the game, pick a color, and he gave all your stones that color, the ability to.
Now you're getting ambitious, because that would be insane.
That feels really good.
Yeah.
So like
all your stones. It's not even just like fire. It's like all stones.
Wait, what did he? Because he gave all your stones that ability.
He gave all your stones
to produce red.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Okay.
you literally just
Asterisk.
you don't change
The
any.
US
You don't
Navy
change
didn't do
anything.
that.
Yeah,
What?
well, you don't change anything else about him. Like, his effect is the same, the front side's the same, you give him an energize, the back side's the same, but his front side says, at the beginning of the game, pick a color, all your stones can tap for that color.
I kind of like that as like a general concept for a ruler. I'm just not sure if it's like what Blazer like would want to do. Like it's like thematically.
Is this what Blazer would want?
Look at him, man. He's a clown. He's an agent of chaos, all right? He's the Joker. Like, he wants to like just turn things to fire. And I think it'd be cool if he just turned like darkness to light, because like he is like the legendary thief, like starting to go down the path of good, so he turns black mana into white mana.
That's
and I
pretty
think that's
cool.
a completely viable
him.
ability, like in the metagame. Like that's kind of disgusting almost.
I like how you're
Suggestion.
giving him like a lot more like chivalry and awesomeness than just like brain dead zombie clown.
He's one of my favorite cards in
Just
New Frontiers
chased Alice
right now.
around the world.
So, interestingly, like you didn't really give him much on the front, which leaves more space on the back. So I think you upgrade him by his backside, where he flips and he strips an ability and destroys the J ruler. He creates a token with the same
Oh my god,
as
that's
the J
disgusting.
ruler.
That's when he clones it. No effects. It's just a
No
vanilla
effects,
token
it's
clone.
just a generic token.
I think
That would be
just
pretty
really
cool.
neat. I
If
still
that
want
would
him
be
to
cool.
deactivate for
if your
zero.
dealer was a 15/15, you get a 15/15 were rabbit.
Jesus. Like, I kind of want him to still deactivate for zero. I feel like if you're like killing their J ruler and getting a body, that almost makes him like into like build around territory where you can no longer play J ruler decks. But like the main update that I wanted to do was I just want him to, when he flips,
be red.
say your opponent's what's to say? When this card enters your field, your opponent's J ruler loses all abilities until end of turn. When this card enters
Instead
your
of
field,
target?
your opponent destroy your opponent's J ruler. Like
Instead
everything
of
else can be the
target?
same. Exactly. I just want to get rid of the target ability because
Can
I
we
think that's just
also
like so.
make it like one ability, so that like you can't like sack Levitine between the strip
Yeah, for
ability
sure.
and kill it?
That would be pretty
Streamline
cool.
it.
But then you're weaker to
Yeah,
Lorite,
it's
so
gotta
I'm like kind of split either way.
That's fair.
Are you though?
Like
Because,
I
if
want to
they
beat
Lorite the
Scheherazade. Is that
destroy,
okay?
like,
So you're hearing this. So I'll send this to Jeff. I'll send this list to Jeff.
Oh,
It'll
yeah,
be great.
please do.
And we'll get some ascended rulers, and it'll be awesome.
One other thing, you mentioned before, like the way they ascended. I think if we ever redo it, the Ascension program, just like distribution, is simply way easier. You only send them to local shops, and they are the Wanderer promos. So for like 3 months, the locals gets like 4 to 5 copies, and they get to run events where people win them, and that's how you distribute them.
So
That'd
like
be
Or
you're
pretty
maybe
not
more
trading
if that's
cards
not
anymore?
enough copies. But you do not go back to the horrible send in bulk rares and trade them in and hope they get mailed within the next 2 months.
Right.
I like the
Okay.
concept for that, but it is a little bit impractical. I will agree.
So, to quickly recap, going down the list, we will just for this week's poll, I guess. So, the who would we ascend? We don't really need to talk about how. We can just say who we would ascend.
Yeah.
So, Frank,
Valentina 2.
Brandon,
Dark Alice.
Josh
Priscia, true Beastmaster.
gets descended.
Decent.
Ryan.
Ryan,
Blazer Girl Rabis, who J activates into Blazer Gil Rabis.
And I would pick Gil Lapis, the primogenitor. So don't forget to go to the Facebook page. It is down below in the description to vote on this week's to see who comes back next week. Unfortunately, Josh can't own the crown, but we'll mail it to him if you decide to vote for his. We'll mail him the imaginary crown. But that does wrap it up for this week's Teachers Lounge. It has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation with you all. And we will see you guys next week. And as always, this is Jeremy Franklin, DMO73, and I am joined by Ryan Miles.
Haha.
Brandan Bremont.
Au revoir.
Frank Closser.
See ya.
And our wonderful patron guest, Josh Patton.
Good night.
And we will see you all next week.